first night. The Merchant and the Jinn. Shahrazad started her first story on the first night. O auspicious king, it is mentioned in the legends that one day there was a merchant who had a lot of wealth in all the lands. One day, he got on a horse and raided his property. As the heat became too bothersome, he sat down under a tree, reached into his food bag, and took out a snack and some fruit. When he ate the fruit, he threw away the seed. Suddenly, a huge Ifrit appeared and approached him, raising his sword and shouting, "Get up, and I will kill you as you killed my child." The terrified merchant looked around to see who this majestic Ifrit was talking to. Ifrit roared under his breath and said, "Don't play dumb with me. You will be killed as you killed my son." The fear merchant asked, "How did I kill your child?" Ifrit said, "When you dropped the seed of the fruit you had eaten, it hit my son's chest, and he died immediately." The merchant, who had always tried to be fair, sighed deeply and said, "O great Ifrit, know that I am a believer, and I do not know how to lie. Now I have many riches, children, and a wife. I have also been entrusted with trusts that I have not delivered to their owners. Let me go home to pay the debts of each, and when I have done this, I will return to you. I promise you that I will return to you. Feel free to treat me as you wish." Ifrit carefully looked deep into the merchant's eyes, and when he saw nothing but the truth, he trusted the merchant and let him go. The merchant returned to his land, fulfilled his obligations, paid the inheritance of his wife and children, and told them the story that had happened to him. So, all of them, relatives, women, and children, began to cry and asked him not to return to Ifrit. But the merchant said to them, "I cannot break the promise I have made, lest the family of the Ifrit say that the custom of chivalry among humans has disappeared, and both you and I know that the difference between being chivalrous and not is keeping the promise." So, he said goodbye to his loved ones, left them alone while they cried, and went back to the place where he saw Ifrit. When the merchant reached the garden, he sat under the same tree that had changed his fate and wept over his destiny. At the same time, the venerable sheikh came to him while leading a deer on a chain. He greeted the merchant, wished him a fruitful life, and asked him, "What is the reason for you sitting alone in this haunted place?" He then heard the merchant's story about the Ifrit. And the sheikh who owned the deer, who was very surprised, said, "I swear to God, your faith is rare, and there are very few people who keep their promises even at the cost of their lives." Then he sat down next to the merchant and said, "I will stay here with you, my friend, until I see what is going on between you and the Ifrit." So, he stayed and talked to the merchant, but realized the merchant was so terrified that he did not hear his words. So, he sat next to the merchant, waiting for Ifrit. At this time, the second sheikh came towards them, leading 2 black greyhound dogs. When he arrived, he greeted them, wished them peace, and asked why they were staying in that haunted place. So, they told him the story from beginning to end. He was also very surprised by this story and said that he would stay with them until he finally saw the story with his own eyes. At this time, a third sheikh arrived holding the reins of a donkey, greeted them, and asked why they had stopped there. Again, they told the story from the beginning to the end and kept him by their side. A sandstorm arose shortly after, and a strong wind blew. After the dust dispersed, the same Ifrit appeared with a delicate blade in his hand. Sparks of fire were thrown around like a storm from his eyes. He gave them a cold look that made them feel like their blood was freezing. He slowly approached them, took the merchant from among them, and said, "I have come to kill you as you killed my son, who was the breath of my life and the fire of my heart." The merchant started to cry, and the 3 sheikhs also started crying. But first sheikh, the deer owner, finally gathered his courage and paid tribute to Ifrit, saying, "O Ifrit, O leader of kings and their crowns, if I tell you the story of myself and the deer and it surprises you, will you give me a third of this merchant's blood in return?" Ifrit replied, "Certainly, sir. If you tell me the story and I find it fantastic, I'll give you a third of his blood. The story of the first sheikh. The first sheikh said, "O great Ifrit, know that this dear is my wife. I married her when she was quite young and lived with her for nearly 30 years, but God did not give me a child through her. Although I really wanted to have a child, because I was in love with this woman, I said to myself that God must not have wanted you to have a child, and I satisfied myself with these words. One day, my old mother became very ill and I brought her to my house to nurse her. Those days were very difficult for me because on the one hand, I was worried about my mother, and on the other hand this woman's bad behavior towards my mother. It made me very sad. With my care, my mother recovered after 2 weeks and returned home, but before she left she said something that shattered my world. During these 2 weeks, when she was at my house, my mother had carefully understood my wife's behavior, that this woman, secretly, put medicine in my food, which causes sterility in men, and is very deadly for women. To prove her point, my mother asked me to switch dishes with my wife in the middle of eating. I hoped that my mother had told a lie because of her grudge against my wife, but alas, when I told her with a smile and a joke that I craved to eat her food and exchanged my food dish with her, this ill-natured woman, with frightened, she threw the food dish and shouted, "Why do you want to kill me?" The world became dark for me. I didn't even ask her why she did that. I just got up and left the house. For several months, like a madman, I went aimlessly from one city to another city, and finally, in the evening of a cold winter day, from extreme hunger and cold, I fell on the snow and passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a warm hut, on a soft and clean bed, and an old man was sitting next to me and watching over me. This old man had found me on his way back to his hut, and for days, he and his daughter took care of me until I was well, and my soul was soothed by their unreserved kindness. I returned to my hometown and divorced this woman and married the old man's daughter. After a year we had a son, and we lived well for several years until I went on a business trip for several months. This woman took advantage of my absence and my wife's kindness and entered my house. She was trained in witchcraft and sorcery. She had turned my son into a calf and his mother into a cow with the art of magic and placed both of them in the herd among 1,000 other cows and calves. After a long time, I returned home, but I did not see any trace of my son and his mother. My first wife came to me and said, "Your wife is dead, and your son has run away, and I don't know where he has fled." I was heartbroken for a year, and I cried all the time. My depression became so severe that my mother vowed to sacrifice a cow and give its meat to the poor. Maybe that would calm my heart down. So, I asked my shepherd to choose a fat cow for me. My first wife went with him and brought a fat cow to me. The poor cow looked at me in tears. The butcher slaughtered the cow, but we were surprised to see that it had no meat under its skin and only thin bones. I shouted at the shepherd, "What kind of cow did you bring? Go and get a calf so that I can be sure that I will get good meat for the poor." This time, my first wife went with him again and brought a calf with her. Seeing me, the calf started sniffing and licking me to such an extent that I did not want to sacrifice it. I was very upset with the behavior of that poor cow, so I could not sacrifice the calf. I gave the calf to the butcher and told him to take it to his house so that I can think more about the strange behavior of these animals. At this point in the story, Shahrzad saw the approaching morning and became cautiously silent. Then her sister Dunyazad said, "Sister, your speech is sweet, tender, and pleasant to the taste." Shahrzad replied, "If I were alive and the king decided to spare me, tomorrow night I will tell the rest of the story to both of you." King said to himself, "I swear to God, I will not kill her until I hear her story." Dunyazad respected the king. Then she kissed her sister and said softly, "Hope to see you again," and left them alone. We leave the royal dormitory and leave those two alone. Until another night and another story.